let's stay there because I'm interested in your viewpoint on the Doc Rivers version of the team. Much was made in the immediate aftermath of Doc being like, well, this is the hardest thing anyone's ever been asked to do. In the history of human endeavor, no one's had a tougher job than taking this team over midstream. The quotes that seemed a little bit like, why did you agree to do this? But more recently, defense has trended up in a lot of the ways that, you talked about systematizing a team. The transition game that was an issue, not as much of an issue anymore. Defensive rebounding, top 5 in that area, improved in terms of defense at the rim and how frequently they're giving up shots at the rim, points in the paint allowed, all these sorts of things. And then the offense has been much more heavily geared toward more Damon pick and roll, reps. Do you feel more confident in this team moving into the playoffs with Doc Rivers at the helm than you would have previously? And I guess sort of what is your confidence level with a Doc Rivers led version of the team, given Doc Rivers's movies that we've seen in the past?
I mean, definitely more confident than I was, through the first half of the season. Because again, just the whispers and what Giannis and the team was saying, in post games, the writing was on the wall that again, Adrian Griffin was not ready to be doing this job with this team. Maybe, a younger team, maybe Adrian Griffin could have figured things out, but there wasn't any, you don't have a ramp up period when the expectations are as high as they are with this team. And you've got, a ticking clock on your window, right? I mean, with Middleton and Brooks contracts and Dame and his age, I mean, I viewed it from the start of the season, it's pretty much a 2-year window, right? And then potentially even this coming summer, things could change dramatically depending on how the playoffs go this year. And certainly you would expect that things will change dramatically probably a year on from where we are now. So I think again, I think Doc's brought just a degree of calmness and professionalism. And again, so much of it is just honestly players know him, they know what they're going to get. He's, I think, been a good communicator with this group. And the low-hanging fruit, I think, piece, which you alluded to a couple of them, right? Get back in transition, right? Don't crash the offensive glass so much. Okay, their offensive rebound rate is down a little bit. Fine, right? Is that part of why their offense has fallen off a little bit? Yeah, I'm sure it's maybe a small contributor. But the transition defense has gotten much better to the point of, A, not being horrible, and B, trending towards actually pretty good, which is where they've historically been. Cleaning up, the defensive glass, as you referenced, right? We always talk about, Bud's job was really about taking the low-hanging fruit when he took over for Jason Kidd, who, had no interest in fruit, regardless of where it hung. And now, I think for Doc, it was a lot of that same thing. It was just basically saying all right, guys, let's get back on D, defensive rebound. And I think some of the engagement we've seen, it's interesting, some of the things he's done have not been you think of him and you would say well, Doc Rivers is certainly more conservative than Adrian Griffin, who was the architect of this, weird Raptors defense these last few years. But, a lot of what kind of some of the things that they've done that have been successful, has been they've done at times against superstars, they've done more trapping and stuff that you do not think of as being conservative, right? They still have Bobby Portis play pretty aggressive on defense, which, again, is there a good way to play Bobby Portis on defense? To be determined at this point.
I think it's giving him more shots. I think that's the best way to play Bobby Portis on defense.
Yeah, exactly. So again, I don't know that a lot of, some things against the Thunder, they started doing a lot of off-ball switching, which they really have not done all season. But, they were switching 1 through 4, or perhaps more accurately 1 through Brook Lopez, pretty much everybody but Brook switches. They were doing that pre-Doc. They've been doing that since Doc. But I think a lot of it's just more kind of in the weeds, right? They've talked about how they've gotten more physical with their switching, right? So trying to go from lazy switching, right, to bringing a physicality and actually when you switch, actually make the other team feel it a little bit. Don't just be doing oh, okay, I just don't want to get over a screen. So things like that, Pat Bev took credit for the off-ball switching and was talking about, how he kind of likes it because it forces them to talk more. And, again, you can kind of fall into this trap, I think, with Chris and Giannis in particular. They're not big talkers on defense. Brook Lopez talks some. Drew wasn't a big talker on defense. And I think, certainly Pat Beverly is a talker in all mediums. Shout out the Pat Bev pod. So I think, again, I think Doc's been one of the reasons for kind of the switch into a more balanced type of team. And it's kind of funny in previous years, the concern in the playoffs was always the offense basically went in the toilet. And that was the reason why this team, when they failed, typically failed. And the defense typically was not really the issue. And, now it's kind of ironic because the defense has kind of gotten back to, slightly above average. And the offense has kind of taken a little bit of a step back. But I'd say most Bucks fans are happy with that trade-off because we spent so much of the first half of the season worried, could they defend at all? And I still think there's huge questions in a playoff series where teams can basically, obviously go through rounds of adjustments and can really target weak links. Are you going to be able to do what they've been doing night to night with switching and things like that against teams in the playoffs? I think that's to be determined. I think I would say that's certainly probably still my biggest concern. But overall, I think they are in a much better spot. And like I said, knock on wood for them, they can get the 2 seed. Who knows who they're going to have to face in the first round? I personally feel like if it's Miami, bring it on, right?
I like it. I like the mentality.
The same thing happened in 2020 and 21. They lost in the second round against the Heat in the bubble. It was this big come down for a team that had a historically awesome regular season. And they basically said, screw it. We're not going to try to, play games with the seeding. If we need to play the Heat, we'll play the Heat. And, Chris Middleton hits overtime game winner in the first game, and then they just rolled them 4-0, right? So is that going to happen this time in a similar fashion? They bounce back from a loss to the Heat with a convincing win. I'm not going to put money on that quite yet, but I would expect them to beat the Heat. And again, we'll see. I feel similar, honestly, to the way I've felt in a lot of other years where, do I trust this team is going to go through 4 rounds and be at their peak in 4 straight playoff rounds? No. I think there's enough flaws, certainly in this year, especially defensively, that they're going to need a lot of luck. But again, I think that's part of what winning a championship, you kind of get an appreciation for. Some things have to break your way. Some things are going to go against you. And at the end of the day, you're just going to have to win close games and make plays and hope that you don't get catastrophic injuries and things like that. So do they have a good chance, as good a chance as any team in the East not named Boston? I would say yes. But again, I think Boston has shown enough during this regular season that they absolutely, are the kind of default team at this point going into the playoffs, right? They've shown enough. And any Celtics fan that tries to tell you, I feel like I've seen a couple examples of Celtics fans sort of hinted that somehow the pressure is not on the Boston Celtics to win the title this year or to come out of the East. Get out of here. The pressure is on you guys. There is pressure on the Bucks, of course, but certainly the weight of expectations, I think, is on the Celtics. And again, if you're the Bucks, honestly, I think in some ways that probably serves them better because every time they've had the best record in the league, they've disappointed at some point, right? So
right. We found the market inefficiency. Don't be the best team in the league. Exactly. if you can just avoid that simple pitfall, who knows what kind of riches might await you after the fact.
But it's always been my secret. Whenever my wife asks you why aren't you better at things, I just say that's my secret. I'm not good at things. Lower expectations, over deliver. Question mark, profit, right? So we'll see if the Bucks can use that same recipe again this year. It's worked once before at least.
I love that. Yeah. How Doc Rivers fills in the question mark is always one of the biggest things to watch in any postseason. So I look forward to learning more about that.